I knew the meeting was going south the second Madison from HR offered me a bruised pear from the office fruit bowl. That tight-lipped Stepford smirk she wore like lip gloss, the same one she used during diversity training and restructuring updates. "Lauren," she said, fingers steepled like a cartoon villain on loan from a Banana Republic sale rack, "we just don't think this is the right time for a promotion." Right time. I'd spent 4 years dragging Vantacor's brand into the 21st century, relaunched 3 failing product lines, rebuilt an entire campaign after the CMO confused TikTok with Tumblr and nearly tanked a 7-figure client. "I see," I replied, voice level, even as I felt the heat rising up my neck. My dignity was packing its suitcase and heading for the fire escape. Then came the kill shot. "In this economy," Madison said, tilting her head like a judgmental golden retriever, "you should just be grateful you have a job." That's when I knew I was done. Knew I was going to burn this place to the goddamn ground if I had to light it with my own 401k. Before I tell you what I did next, let me say this real quick. 97% of you are watching these stories without hitting subscribe. I'm out here waging full-scale career warfare and trying to hit 10K subscribers. All I'm asking is you tap the button. I'll handle the hostile takeovers. Anyway, Madison stood up like our conversation was over, tried to smile like this was a mutual win, like she'd handed me a scented candle instead of spitting in my face. I let the silence sit. Then I reached under the table and hit record on my phone. "Just so I understand," I said, keeping my voice steady, "you're saying that exceeding every campaign target, mentoring 2 junior strategists, outperforming male colleagues, and growing department-wide engagement by 32% still doesn't justify a promotion?" Madison blinked, caught slightly off guard. "Lauren, let's not be dramatic." Dramatic. That word hit like a slap. That was always her thing. Turn ambition into hysteria. Turn facts into feelings. Gaslight women into gratitude. She didn't even realize she was being recorded when she added, "Some people just aren't leadership material. Maybe if you smiled more in meetings." I smiled then. Wide. Too wide. The kind of smile you see in crime documentaries. "Thanks, Madison," I said, standing. "This has been enlightening." That night, half a bottle of Barefoot Moscato and several doom scrolls into LinkedIn later, I saw it. A vague posting from Ardent Dynamics. Senior Strategy Director. Confidential search. Must understand market disruption. Competitive compensation. It didn't mention them by name, but I knew their tone, knew the font. I had dissected their design language in a competitor breakdown last quarter. I clicked apply before I could overthink it. No cover letter, no formality. Just uploaded my portfolio and typed a single line. Ask your board if they're ready to win a war. It was impulsive, maybe career suicide. But for the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like a ghost haunting Vantacor's open-plan tomb. I felt awake, like someone had handed me a match and finally pointed me toward the gas leak. By midnight, a calendar invite arrived. Confidential screening interview with Ardent Dynamics. 20 minutes after that, "Miss Dalton is looking forward to speaking with you directly." Miss Dalton? If Madison was expired vanilla pudding in a pantsuit, Miss Dalton was a polished blade dipped in perfume. I'd read about her. Ardent's CEO. Ruthless. Brilliant. Never smiled in interviews, wore suits that could buy a condo, and ran the company like a battlefield. The email made my stomach twist. Because I knew. This wasn't a job interview. This was a war declaration. The first 2 interviews were polite fiction. Greg, the brand officer, asked me about cross-channel synergy like it meant something outside of buzzword bingo. A younger woman named Fallon, or maybe it was Fern, walked me through Ardent's org chart, pausing every few slides to spotlight non-traditional value creators. Translation: Ardent liked sharks. Silent ones. The kind that smiled while circling blood. But it was the third interview that detonated everything. Thursday, 7:02 p.m. I stepped into a private elevator at Ardent's downtown tower. The receptionist didn't speak, just handed me a badge and hit PH. I'd read enough corporate thrillers to know penthouse meetings weren't for onboarding. The elevator doors opened directly into an office that looked carved out of black marble and intimidation. Floor-to-ceiling windows, abstract art that whispered tax shelter, one chair, one desk. And behind it, Miss Dalton. She didn't rise. Didn't offer a handshake. She didn't need to. "Lauren," she said, motioning to the seat across from her. "Tell me what's wrong with Vantacor." No greeting, no resume talk, just that. I hesitated. "From a marketing perspective?" She didn't blink. "From a viability perspective, sell me on why they're weak." I exhaled. My gut said run. My ego said finally. "They've got legacy bloat," I started. "Mid-tier managers protecting failed frameworks. Content pipeline is a graveyard of recycled pitches. The CEO hasn't had a new idea since 2015. Internal messaging is empty jargon wrapped in outdated design." Dalton's lip curved into something that almost looked like a smile. "Go on." So I did. God help me. I told her how Madison killed any idea she didn't originate, how our chief marketing officer, Mark Tilden, couldn't close a deal without a golf trip and 3 whiskeys, how internal collaboration meant 5 Slack channels arguing about slide fonts. I peeled the company apart for 30 minutes straight like a seasoned butcher with a vendetta. When I stopped, Dalton leaned forward. "We don't just want to beat them," she said, voice cool and focused. "We want to become them, then replace them from the inside." My pulse kicked. It felt like a chessboard was assembling beneath my feet, and I was being offered queen. Dalton slid a single-page document across the desk. Minimal print. No fluff. No logo. Just one title. Senior Strategy Director. Ardent Dynamics. Compensation. Enough to wipe out my student loans and then some. Benefits. Executive support staff, international relocation, stock options, and one peculiar clause, performance bonus tied directly to market share acquired from Vantacor. I looked up. Her voice softened, but not kindly. "We know about the Dreamforge campaign, the over-budget rebrand, the churn numbers. We've seen your fingerprints." She paused. "What they ignored in you, we value." It wasn't flattery. It was a mission brief. "You're not being hired to run ads," she said. "You're being hired to end theirs." I should have felt fear, guilt, hesitation. Instead, I reached for the pen. Because in that moment, every late night, every gaslight, every time I was told to stay in my lane, morphed into one crystal-clear thought. They made me small. I'm about to make them extinct. My new office was on the top executive floor of Ardent. Soundproof. Reinforced glass. No nameplate. Just a biometric lock, a voice ID panel, and a sleek white desk with a waiting tablet. On it, one file. Operation Iron Hand. I opened it expecting onboarding videos or brand guidelines. Instead, I got a strategic kill list. At 9:14 a.m., Dalton entered without knocking. No entourage, no words. Just a black folder placed on my desk like a judge laying down a sentence. "This is not marketing," she said. "This is dismantling." Inside, full bios on Vantacor's board, financials, political donations, off-record affairs, family businesses draining capital, addiction histories, deleted complaints, things you don't get from LinkedIn. Somehow, Dalton had it all. "These people have been sick for a long time," Dalton said, her voice like cold glass. "We're just accelerating the expiration date." I flipped through the folder, stunned. One board member had been quietly funneling vendor contracts to a shell company co-owned by her cousin. Another had made a political donation that would send Vantacor's biggest client running. One VP had propositioned a junior analyst during a company retreat, something I remembered all too well from an email thread that mysteriously vanished after Madison handled it. I looked up. "You've had this for how long?" Dalton didn't blink. "Long enough, but we needed someone who could turn information into impact." That's when I understood. I wasn't the weapon. I was the trigger. I turned to the glass whiteboard behind my desk. Blank. Waiting. I picked up a dry erase marker and wrote one word in bold, angry strokes. Leverage. By noon, I met my team. 3 people, all killers in their own domains. Felix, cybersecurity savant with a British accent sharp enough to cut glass. Naomi, forensic accountant, quiet, dead-eyed, devastating with numbers. Rob, brand strategist, formerly of Vantacor, who'd quit in a blaze of glory involving a fire alarm, 2 margaritas, and a resignation letter taped to Madison's keyboard. I liked them immediately. Felix handed me a tablet showing Vantacor's internal systems. "We already have passive access," he said casually. "Nothing intrusive. No right privileges. Just eyes." Naomi followed. Dreamforge is bleeding cash. We're tracking it. Projected loss to deliverable ratio is worse than we expected. It's basically a bonfire fueled by interns in denial. Later that afternoon, Dalton returned. This time, it wasn't a visit. It was a mission briefing. She stood at the head of a black glass conference table, framed by a screen showing 2 stock graphs, Ardent and Vantacor. The gap wasn't massive, but it was wide enough to hurt. "Your role," she said, eyes on me, "is to create instability, disrupt internal trust, undermine investor confidence. When we bid, they won't resist. They'll beg." She tapped her tablet. The screen updated to show a target, $30 per share. That was the goal. Drop Vantacor's valuation below 30. That would trigger the acquisition window. We had 3 months. The weight hit me like a falling elevator. This wasn't just a new job. This was the erasure of my past life. I remembered every time Mark lectured the team about vision, even while stealing ideas straight from my decks. Every time Madison slashed a woman's raise, then quoted budget constraints while greenlighting a $25K executive alignment retreat in Aspen. I thought of the interns whose names no one learned, the colleagues told to be less direct or wait their turn. And I said nothing, because I needed to stay. Not anymore. Still, I asked, what about the good people? People like Dave? Dalton didn't flinch. "That's your call, but don't lose focus. You can't punish a system without cracking a few bones." I nodded. Game on. By Monday morning, I'd mapped every executive at Vantacor, not with org charts, but with fragility charts. Mark? Status addict. Insecure about his originality. Obsessed with perception. Needed to be the smartest guy in every room, even when he wasn't. Madison? Control freak with a martyr complex. Terrified of accountability. Fluent in moral high ground PR speak. Only kept receipts if they protected her. Others had similar cracks. One was on mood stabilizers. One had a divorce settlement tied to restricted stock. One VP cried after every review cycle. They weren't wolves. They were deer on stilts, convinced they were untouchable. I didn't need to destroy them. I just needed to spook them, hard enough that they trampled each other. The first strike had to be precise. Not a nuke yet, but a scalpel. Public enough to rattle confidence. Subtle enough not to scream sabotage. Entered Dreamforge, an overhyped internal platform initiative that was supposed to redefine content delivery. In reality, A stitched-together Frankenstein of poor documentation, inflated scope, and 3 feuding project managers. I'd written the original brief before Madison gutted the dev team and replaced half of them with unpaid interns. Now it was 6 weeks behind, dangerously unstable, and hemorrhaging budget faster than a Vegas bachelor party. Perfect. That night, I wrote an anonymous submission to TechPulse, a well-known gossip blog favored by investors and mid-level engineers with too much caffeine and curiosity. I disguised it as a whistleblower post. Rumor has it Vantacore's Dreamforge initiative is about to implode. Over budget, under-delivered. Management is scrambling to reframe it as experimental R&D to save face. Morale is in freefall. Internal docs suggest an imminent pivot, but not for the better. I added just enough real detail to make it undeniable. The post went live at 9:14 a.m. By 9:52, internal Slack channels at Vantacore were on fire. By noon, the first external tremor hit, a tweet from a nervous investor asking whether the pivot was part of a long-term roadmap or just damage control. By 2:00 p.m., the company's internal newsletter had a rushed clarification from Mark, wrapped in so much corporate spin it could have powered a wind turbine. Agile realignment, beta phase momentum, iterative disruption. It worked even better than I expected. At 5:37 p.m., I got a text from a name I hadn't seen in over a year. Dave. Smart. Kind. One of the few genuinely decent people at Vantacore. The kind of guy who brought muffins to interns on their first day and stayed late to fix other people's messes. Crazy. What's happening here? The vultures are circling. I stared at his message, stomach twisting. Guilt hit like ice down the spine. Dave didn't know I was one of the vultures. He just knew things were unraveling. I almost typed, "Get out while you can." But I didn't. Because if he asked why, I'd either have to lie, or worse, tell the truth. I tossed my phone onto the desk and stared through the floor-to-ceiling window of my war room. The skyline looked too clean, too sterile for the sabotage I was orchestrating. And yet, something settled in me. Not guilt, not quite. Resolve. This wasn't petty. This wasn't revenge. This was architecture, and the first pillar had cracked. Vantacore's stock dipped slightly, just under 2%. Small, but enough to trigger whispers. Analysts noticed. So did the board, and like I predicted, Mark panicked. Instead of slowing down Dreamforge, he doubled down. He pulled another $500K from the Q4 reserve to accelerate deployment, which meant slapping duct tape over broken code and calling it disruptive architecture. He even used that exact phrase in a shareholder email. 3 Apex interns forwarded me the email with memes attached. My favorite, a man duct taping a banana to a wall captioned, "Mark's growth strategy." I didn't laugh. I savored, but the next move had to hit harder. This wasn't about embarrassment, it was about revenue. Vantacore's largest client? Solara Logistics, a Fortune 200 logistics firm with a zero tolerance for mess and a renewal date 2 weeks out. I knew their CTO hated Mark's tendency to oversell and underdeliver. I knew their procurement director once said, over drinks, that if Ardent ever made a pitch, they'd listen. So I didn't pitch. I launched. We rolled out a case study campaign, technically anonymous, but unmistakably targeted. No mention of Vantacore, but the language was a scalpel. We don't call it innovation when deadlines are missed. We call it incompetence. We fix it. We bought ad space on every platform Solara's execs used for research, sponsored their newsletters, dropped a white paper titled The Cost of Chaos, When Innovation Fails Its Timeline. It landed like napalm in a wind tunnel. Within 48 hours, Solara's procurement lead emailed Ardent's sales team. By the end of the week, I was in a Zoom call with their CIO, walking through a transition plan I had mocked up 6 months ago, back when I was still chained to Vantacore's sinking ship. It felt like slipping into my old clothes, but this time with sharper tailoring and a loaded weapon tucked in the lining. When the deal closed, Ardent issued a short press release. "We're excited to welcome Solara Logistics into the Ardent family." No fanfare, no gloating, just a quiet, calculated bullet to Vantacor's revenue stream. Their stock dropped 4 points overnight. Mark went quiet on LinkedIn, and then came the cherry on top. Madison. At 9:13 a.m. The following Monday, a company-wide email from her desk hit every inbox at Vantacor. Subject line, a note on integrity. I opened it immediately. It began with, "In challenging times," continued with a ramble about leadership in the face of adversity, then detoured into vague references about anonymous attacks and disruptive forces, and finally landed on my favorite line of all. "We must resist the temptation of short-term gain at the expense of long-term loyalty." I read it twice. Then I opened the recording on my phone, the one from our last HR meeting. "In this economy, you should just be grateful you have a job." God, the irony practically dripped off the screen. She was casting herself as a martyr, the last noble gatekeeper of corporate virtue, all while pretending she hadn't spent years gatekeeping actual careers. But I wasn't angry. I was energized, because this wasn't just about bringing down a company. This was about shattering a mythology. The one where Madison was a moral compass, where Mark was a visionary, where I was disposable. Later that afternoon, Naomi sent a one-line message in Ardent's secure Slack channel. "We've initiated shadow buys. Portfolio under Shell ID NXT3. Translation, Ardent was now quietly buying Vantacor stock. No announcements, no sudden moves, just silent, systematic devouring. Each dip in share price? Another bite, like sharks circling from below. Subtle wounds. No screaming, no blood in the water, until there's nothing left. And by all metrics, the plan was working, until I got a text that brought everything crashing sideways. "You free for coffee this week?" From Dave. Just 7 words. No emoji, no follow-up. But that's how I knew he meant it, because Dave didn't fish for responses. He waited. He was serious. I stared at the screen. Meeting him would be dangerous, not just tactically, but emotionally. Dave wasn't a threat. He was a memory, a good one. Office breakfasts, shared eye rolls when Madison used synergy 3 times in one sentence. Late nights building decks we knew Mark would present as his own. He'd always seen me, even when the company didn't. This wasn't before. This was now. Still, I said yes. I picked a neutral spot, a tiny cafe far from both Ardent and Vantacor. No logos, no risk. Just mismatched mugs, bad lighting, and enough plants to make a greenhouse jealous. He was already there when I arrived. Black coffee. Same worn denim jacket. Same furrow in his brow that deepened when something felt off. We hugged, brief, awkward, and sat. He didn't waste time. "Something's happening," he said, "and I think you know what it is." I held his gaze. "You think I'm leaking?" He shrugged. "I think you left, and 3 weeks later, the company started bleeding from places only you would know how to cut." It should have stung. It didn't. It just clarified. "Why reach out?" I asked. He looked down at his cup. "Because I'm not mad. I just want to understand." I stayed quiet. Then he added, "They're blaming you. You know that, right?" I blinked. "Mark?" He nodded. "In leadership meetings, he's telling everyone the downturn started with you. Says your campaigns were bloated, that Ardent poached you as a pity hire. Madison's backing him up. Says she always had doubts about you." Something in me went ice cold. Not the numbing kind, the focusing kind. He said that? Verbatim, Dave said. I laughed once, dry and sharp. I was a threat when I was quiet. Now I'm a scapegoat. He nodded. And I think they're scared. I looked at Dave for a long time. He didn't flinch, just sipped his coffee like he hadn't just lit the fuse I'd been trying not to name. The guilt I'd been carrying, quiet, corrosive, suddenly crystallized. Not because of what I'd done, but because of what they were doing. Rewriting history, painting me as the failure, as the reason their empire cracked. I slid my napkin toward him and tapped the table twice. Take a vacation, I said. He blinked. What? Cash out a few sick days. Don't ask questions. Just be somewhere else next week. He stared at me. Why? I leaned in, lowered my voice. Because the walls are going to move, and I don't want you under them when they do. He didn't push, just nodded. That's how I knew he was still the same Dave. Loyal, quiet, observant, and smart enough to know when not to demand answers. As I walked away from that cafe, my chest burned. Not from guilt anymore, but something sharper. Resolve. They thought they could bury me in gaslight and silence. They forgot I was the one who built the system they're now choking on. It was time for the final act. After coffee with Dave, I didn't sleep. I paced my apartment, glass of whiskey in one hand, fire in my chest. I replayed every slight, every smirk, every maybe next quarter from Mark. Every time Madison hijacked a promotion process. Every you're so good with logistics instead of here's the raise you earned. By sunrise, I wasn't angry. I was ready. I opened Ardent's classified operations channel, uploaded everything. This wasn't a leak. It was an autopsy. I gave them Vantacor's creative accounting models, showed how Mark shuffled budgets between departments to inflate quarterly numbers, how he labeled failed R&D projects as pilot marketing efforts to dodge responsibility. I flagged it in passing once, months ago, got brushed off. Now it was evidence. Then I dropped the nuclear core, a 2019 HR complaint about a VP cornering a junior analyst at an off-site retreat, a complaint that vanished after Madison handled it internally. I'd seen the emails, I'd kept them. Everyone had pretended it was forgotten. But trauma has a half-life. It glows even after the lights go out. Ardent's legal team didn't wait. Within 72 hours, they filed a formal, hostile takeover bid. The press release was civil. Sanitized language about market synergy, potential growth, and long-term value alignment. But make no mistake, it was a declaration of war. Vantacor's board scrambled. Naomi reported 2 directors cutting vacations short. One flew back early from Napa. Another canceled a safari. Poor thing. I watched it all from my office. Quiet. Focused. Felix had piped their internal Slack threads into a mirrored dashboard for monitoring. Read only. Real time. Glorious. The meltdown was beautiful. One thread had Mark typing in all caps about corporate espionage. Another had Madison quoting NDA clauses like they were scripture. One poor soul tried to float the idea that maybe this was a strategic pivot opportunity. They got ratioed into digital hell within minutes. Then came the investor exodus. 3 major firms pulled preferred status. Solara released a vague statement about reevaluating vendor alignment. And then, boom, an anonymous tip hit The Verge about the buried HR complaint. It went viral in under 6 hours. Madison's name trended on Twitter under the hashtag #ComplicitKaren. I didn't gloat. I watched. Still, unblinking. It wasn't joy I felt. It was silence. The kind that settles after a building falls. Not the crash, the groan of steel, the shift of the earth. The final breath of something that knew it was done. I had crossed the Rubicon. No turning back. No apologies. No survivors. This wasn't about being heard. It was about being remembered. When Dalton stepped into my office the next morning, her smile was already in place, razor sharp and 10 seconds ahead of her. "You've done well," she said simply. I nodded. "They're drowning." She studied me. "They always thought you'd be the one begging for a lifeline." I looked past her, toward the skyline and the massive Vantacor banner flickering across a glass tower across the street. It was crooked, like their legacy, like the lies they built careers on. "Not anymore," I said. "Now I give them front row seats to their own extinction." The final play was set in motion. The board's knees were buckling. Dalton showed me the filings, the whispers, the panicked LinkedIn messages from Vantacor executives trying to connect with ardent recruiters like flare guns fired into a storm. That's how we got the meeting. A closed-door session held in Ardent's top-floor executive suite. Vantacor's board had requested it, trying to explore non-hostile outcomes. That's how cowards phrase surrender. They didn't know I'd be in the room. That was Dalton's gift to me. I spent the night before prepping, not with nerves, but with surgical calm, like a sniper polishing her final round. I replayed every insult, every fake compliment, every time Mark said my work lacked executive vision. Every moment Madison smiled while slashing someone's future. Dalton entered my office an hour before the meeting. She didn't sit. "Make them understand why this was inevitable," she said quietly. Then added, almost as a benediction, "Burn it all down." At 10 a.m. sharp, the conference doors opened. Mark and Madison walked in like ghosts of themselves. Mark's tie was crooked. Madison's foundation couldn't fully hide the rash behind her ears. That telltale flare-up she always got when scandals crept too close. Dalton stood at the head of the table, flanked by her legal team. She didn't offer a handshake. "We're here to discuss the terms of Vantacor's transition," she began. "Should the board accept our revised acquisition bid?" Madison tried to smile. "We appreciate the willingness to negotiate." Dalton didn't blink. "This isn't a negotiation." She turned to me. "Lauren, walk them through the transition structure." It was like dropping a match into a silence soaked in gasoline. Mark's head snapped toward me. The sound of his neck popping echoed faintly in the glass room. Madison's expression cracked for a half-second before she defaulted to corporate blankness. I took my time opening the folder. Let the moment breathe. Let them sit in it. Then I began. Clear, unflinching, deliberate. I outlined the dissolution of Vantacor's executive structure, the asset consolidations, the brand purges. I listed which departments would be absorbed and which ones would be shuttered entirely. Mark tried to interrupt. "What about continuity assurances for—" I cut him off without looking up. "There will be continuity, just not for you." Madison leaned forward, a flicker of desperation behind her eyes. "I think we can all agree that loyalty—" I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone, tapped play. Her voice, crystal clear, filled the room. "In this economy, you should just be grateful you have a job." The silence afterward was delicious. Mark blinked like a man just realizing the guillotine wasn't for show. Madison froze, her lips parting, but no words coming. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded. "You told me I wasn't leadership material," I said. "You were right. I wasn't built to manage your rot." I paused. "I was built to tear it down." Dalton stood. "Effective immediately, Ardent assumes all governance operations. All existing executive roles at Vantacor will be eliminated during integration." Mark opened his mouth again, then closed it. Madison looked down, blinking rapidly. I stood, packed my folder, turned to leave, then paused and looked over my shoulder. "Consider this my letter of gratitude," I said. "You taught me what I was worth." And I walked out, leaving them in the ruins they built, lit by the match they handed me. The walk from the boardroom felt longer than it was. Not because of nerves. Those had burned out somewhere between the acquisition documents and the HR complaint I detonated on Madison's career. No, this walk was different. It was final. The last step in a process I hadn't even realized I'd begun the moment Madison said, "Be grateful." Dalton walked beside me in silence. All precision and presence. No small talk. No pats on the back. Just the soft click of heels over polished marble. Flooring that had once seemed too expensive for someone like me to walk on without permission. Now I was walking it like I owned the damn building. The double doors opened. Mark and Madison were already seated at the conference table. They both looked up when they saw me, and this time, neither of them tried to hide what they were feeling. Mark looked like a man watching the wreckage of his career in real time. Paler than I'd ever seen him, collar damp with sweat. Madison's mouth twitched. Not quite a frown, not quite a smirk. Just static. Like her programming was glitching and didn't know how to respond to a future where she wasn't in charge of the narrative. Dalton didn't offer greetings. "We're here to finalize the acquisition structure," she said. Madison jumped in, voice bright and brittle. "We'd love to ensure this is a smooth transition. Obviously, we have valuable insights to—" I slid a folder across the table. "Your insights are already cataloged, color-coded, and rendered obsolete." Mark narrowed his eyes. "So, you're leading this?" He said it like it was a crime, like he couldn't compute the math where I sat at this table, and he was a liability line in a redundancy report. "Yes," I said simply. "I am." And then I began. This time, there were no punches pulled. I laid out the asset absorption timeline, the termination packages, the legal exposure from the buried complaints, now all fully documented and gift-wrapped for Ardent's compliance division. Every time Mark tried to redirect, I countered with precise financial figures. Every time Madison tried to pivot, I shut her down with receipts. Exact dates, exact actions, exact failures. They weren't in a meeting. They were in a trial. And I was the prosecution. Cornered, Madison made her last move. She leaned forward, trying to conjure warmth in her voice. "Lauren, I always tried to support you. This company meant something to all of us. Don't you think, on some level, you owe it some loyalty?" I didn't respond. Instead, I pulled out my phone again, tapped play. "In this economy, you should just be grateful you have a job." Her voice filled the room again, just as sharp, just as small. Mark looked down at the table like it might crack open and swallow him. I let the silence stretch. Long, uncomfortable. Then I stood. "You told me to be grateful," I said. I walked to the end of the table, looked Madison in the eye. "Well, here it is. Consider this my letter of gratitude. You taught me what I was worth." I turned, walked out. Dalton followed. The doors shut behind us with a soft, final click. Not a slam, not a bang, a verdict. As we made our way down the hall, I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel joy. I felt stillness, like the world had finally caught up with me and fallen silent. Because justice isn't loud. It isn't angry. It's complete. I reached the elevator and paused to look back through the glass. Vantacor's logo was still lit on the tower across the street. For now. But I knew the truth. I wasn't their downfall. I was just the one who made it undeniable. And when the dust settled, when the stock tanked, when the headlines finally caught up with the whispers, they'd remember me, not as a saboteur, not as an angry employee, but as the woman they tried to bury in silence, and who came back with the map to their extinction.